Hello, boys and girls. This is Mr. Royce. I just want to start my video lesson by saying that I miss you all very, very much. I hope you are all safe and well. And today we're going to be talking about my chickens, but more specifically, we're going to be talking about the eggs that they produce. So here's a video from about a year ago when we first got our chicks. They're in their incubator that we set up, and as you can tell, my dog Gibson is very, very interested.
Yes, the chicks, Nanny.
Alright, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the anatomy of an egg. Now, before I get into that though, I would just like to point out that this red line right here doesn't actually represent an organ. It represents a division between the hard outer shell and the inner membrane. Now, it's important to notice this distinction because it's not only the hard outer shell that gives the egg its strength. The shell on the outside and the membrane on the inside work together in order to protect the organs inside of the egg. Now, the inner membrane also holds what's called the air chamber, and the air chamber acts as a type of cushion in order to protect the inner white albumin, which is the white part of the egg, and the yolk itself. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is the chalazo, which is these branded strands of protein. And you could think of these almost as like a seatbelt that protects and holds the yolk in place. But that's enough of that science mumbo jumbo. Let's talk about a real world application. Boys and girls, welcome to Mr. Sorois's kitchen. Today we are going to be frying an egg. But what we're going to do is we're going to use that knowledge that we just talked about in order to make sure that we do not get shells in our egg. Now, commonly when you fry an egg, you have your pan ready. Hopefully you have a nice oil down to keep the egg from sticking. And everybody always takes their egg and goes to crack it on the side of the pan. Now, you do not want to do that. The reason why, boys and girls, is because that outer shell and that inner membrane stick to each other. So if you crack an egg on the side of a pan, you'll actually send pieces of the shell into the white albumin, which then in turn causes you to get shells in your egg. Now, the proper way that you should crack an egg is by hitting it on a flat surface so you can avoid getting shells in the albumin. Now, if you make sure that you crack your eggs on a flat surface instead of the side of the pan, you will always guarantee that you will never get shells in your egg. Alright, so the next thing that I would like to talk about or discuss is whether or not eggs can be considered cells. Now, eggs are considered to be cells when they are unfertilized. Because they are considered single cells, they are technically the largest cells on Earth. But of course, just like with anything else, this definition is not cut and dry. If the shell of the egg is considered the cell membrane and everything else is considered the cell, then it can be said that it is a single cell. If, however, you consider the yolk and the albumin, which is the white part of the egg that we talked about earlier, separate structures, then you can argue that eggs are not actually a single cell. Now, it's important to note that the germinal disc of the egg that you can find in its yolk contains the nucleus and most of the cytoplasm of the egg cell. The actual DNA and organelles and etc. are all confined to a small spot that is attached to the yolk. This is where fertilization happens and what eventually develops into an embryo. So you might call this part the egg. Now, the rest of the egg only serves to feed or protect the embryo after fertilization. However, in some animals, the yolk is actually incorporated into the cytoplasm of the ovum, and so the entire yolk could be considered an egg. Now, in general, the scientific community accepts that the yolk of an egg is one single massive cell, thousands of times bigger than typical cells. It's really funny to think about it or try to imagine how cells, which are generally way too small to be seen, could actually be so large that they fit in the palm of your hand. Now, let's talk about an ostrich egg for a moment. At 3.3 pounds, if you consider an egg to be a large single existing cell, then you could argue that the ostrich egg is literally the largest existing single cell on the planet. Alright, so before I leave you, I would like to go through some interesting facts about chickens. Number 1, healthy hens, like I have here, lay eggs every 25 hours. Eggs do not have to be refrigerated. In fact, they can last up to 2 weeks on the counter if their bloom or protective coating is left intact. Did the chicken or the egg come first? Believe it or not, we know that the egg actually came first. Both parents of the first modern chicken were actually not chickens. Instead, they were both chicken-like animals whose combined genetics birthed the first chicken egg, which then in turn hatched the very first chicken. Also, chickens are the closest living relatives to the Tyrannosaurus rex. A scientific study done recently compared the ancient DNA of a T-Rex with multiple modern organisms and found that chicken's DNA was the closest match.